everybody. We got some new faces in meditation tonight, and we got some old faces, not old people, you know what I mean? The talk tonight is a very interesting one. I find it very interesting, at least. I don't know if anybody else is going to find it interesting, but that's just meditation every single week. Is anybody here raised as a Catholic? Catholic? Nobody else? And? Okay, great. So at least two people will get a little bit of what I'm talking about. But if your Catholic upbringing was like mine, this is it's gonna sound like totally confusing and not like your experience at all. So I went to Catholic school as a young boy from first grade until 7th grade when I moved. And there was a lot about my experience that I truly hated, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that what I had was a kind of typical experience being in Catholic middle school. Part of it was just like the social part of it was really rough for me, but part of it was just kind of being in this kind of system which felt to me to be very like stifling, and there were a lot of issues with it. Now, you could say in any martial arts school, if you take like the style of Kung Fu or Tai Chi, there are thousands of different styles of Kung Fu, many different styles of Tai Chi. But even within the same style, different people teach a different way. So I'm sure some people out there had a great experience in Catholic school. I guess that's where all the priests and nuns come from. But I'm going to talk about a podcast that I heard, and I don't know if any of you have ever listened to the Lex Friedman podcast. He, generally speaking, in my experience, has really great conversations with really interesting guests. Some of it is controversial, but he's one of the lesser kind of controversial people. He really gets at the heart, at the core of the human experience in a lot of ways. And this was an interview that he did with Bishop Robert Barron, who's a Catholic bishop. And when I was listening to this, I was like, wow, this guy is great at communicating things that I never heard in all of my days of being a practicing Catholic when I was younger, going to church, being in school. And I was listening, and the connections to and similarities to our own kind of martial arts and Zen philosophy were just clear as day to me in a way that I've seldom experienced. I do think that on a deep level, on the level that is most important, most religions and philosophies are after the same thing and believe in many of the same things. Then there are all the extra fluff and the differences that people try to point out and use to kind of gain control and leverage over people and try to say, this is why we're the best, and if you don't believe in us, you're going to hell, so on and so forth. But this conversation really kind of brought a couple of things to mind that, like, I wish I had heard when I was younger, sitting in church. I didn't hear any of this stuff. I will say, when I was going to church when I was younger, I really had an experience of feeling like claustrophobic, and I will still to this day sometimes when I'm sitting in Mass, which I don't go to very often, but I still feel that way sometimes. And I think that is largely due to just my experiences when I was young. But the way that this Bishop, Robert Barron, was talking about his faith and what he believes Catholicism and Christianity should be like, I feel like would not have given me a claustrophobic feeling. So they started off right to the point. The first question is, who is God? What is God? And so the bishop he goes back a lot to Thomas Aquinas, who I haven't read a lot of, but I've heard his name quite a bit, especially in this conversation. He says, Thomas Aquinas' definition of God is essentially to be, or it's like the act of being itself. And this is confusing and kind of like purposefully so. So when I was a kid and I was like in, Bible study and in class in school, it was like God is like a grandpa who lives in the clouds and he tells people what to do, and gets angry and smites you if you do the wrong thing. And his whole point is like, this is a totally silly way of thinking about God. And I agree completely. His definition is very much kind of like a Zen way of looking at the world and life. And that's why the name of this talk is Catholic Zen. He is describing God in kind of a similar way that I would describe or attempt to describe like what we're after in meditation, what we're after in our practice, physical and internal. And this is like the point where essence and existence coincide. Another way of looking at it, also kind of meaningless and purposefully vague, but it's like God is that which you cannot say, you cannot point to God. Just like you can't really point to the essence of the universe. You can't point to like what is enlightenment, what is it that makes you feel the oneness and the connection to everything. You can't point to it, you can't touch it, yet it's everywhere, right? I'm not going to say like, none of you are this, but only Meryl is this. That is a very limiting way, a very tangible way that doesn't really work when you're after the deep stuff. So when you are considering what is God, or like what is the divine, what is really like core and deep about our experience, it's something that is everywhere and yet also no one thing, right? This is something that you can't point to or touch. We can try to point to it, we can try to point to it with words, but you can't really get it. So this is like whenever there's a full moon, and I'm sure there will be one tonight because there was one last night. I don't think we'll be able to see it before we're done with the talk, but whenever I see the full moon in class, some of you have been in class when I do this, I point to it, and I say, this line from Enter the Dragon, which if you haven't seen Enter the Dragon, you should watch it. It's a great movie. Bruce Lee's like masterpiece that most people think is one of the best martial arts movies ever made. And he describes this. Ironically, there's no moon in this scene. It's just the daylight. I don't know why they didn't do it during the nighttime, but he's pointing, and he says, it's like the moon, it's like the finger pointing to the moon. And the person he's talking to, this student of his, kind of looks at Bruce Lee's finger, and he whacks him on the head. He says, don't look at the finger. And you miss all of that heavenly glory. So when we try to get at this with words or with thinking, you can't quite get it. You can only point in that direction. And this is really what religion and philosophy and our whole practice is trying to do. It's pointing us in a direction, but it's not the thing, right? It's the finger pointing to the thing on some level. On another level, it's really nice to just think of, meditation as being like the point in and of itself, although there is a thing that it's kind of pointing to. So, another thing that he said, he was talking about this story, many of you have heard this story of Moses seeing the burning bush. And there's this guy, Moses, and he's going through the desert, and he's looking for answers, and he comes upon this burning bush. And the burning bush starts to talk to him, and he's like, what is this? Am I hallucinating? This is weird. And then God starts to talk to him as the burning bush. And he's bringing up this story because he points out that the bush does not become incinerated. It doesn't burn and then just turn to dust. The bush is on fire, but it's like it's alight, it's lit up, because he says God doesn't exist as a competitive force in the world. It's not like for God to do his thing, he's got to smash other things. He doesn't have to burn the bush, it's kind of like lights the bush up. And this is, again, kind of a tricky thing to get at with words, but I like this in our own practice because we talk about it all the time. We don't want to be in competition with each other, right? If I'm practicing with Meryl, I'm not trying to beat her. If I'm at the highest level of practice, I'm working with my partner, and If she lands a punch, that's great, I appreciate it. If I land a punch, that's great, I appreciate it. And if she's being a great partner, then we kind of have this great kind of feeling practicing together. It's not me versus her, it's us working together. And so this gives us a feeling of what this is like, right? Whether you believe it is God or the divine or just like the universe, the oneness, this experience of being really present with somebody else without being in competition with them. I'm not trying to separate myself. I'm just there, and we kind of become one and the same. We become part of the same whole. He starts talking about the idea of faith. And faith is something that I have myself had a really hard time with. I don't like believing in things that I can't see and I can't touch and I can't experience. So this is why, for me, I think being a Christian or Catholic didn't really make sense, because I was like, well, where is this grandpa in the sky? I can't see him. And that was my kind of like small understanding of what it was. But faith in anything, when I say to you, like, there's this thing called enlightenment, and if you practice meditating long enough, you will get this kind of superhuman sense of yourself in the universe. You will lay all of your petty problems aside and just be totally full and happy all the time. That's like, well, that's nice for you to say, but unless you experience at least a piece of it, you don't really, it's kind of hard to believe that, just to take it on somebody's word. For me, when I meditated the first time, I had like a whisper of it. I had an experience that lasted a moment, and this is possibly what they call a satori, which is like a momentary enlightenment, where you feel, for me, it was just for a moment. I mean, it was like literally a split second where my thoughts dropped away, and all there was just the breath and just the moment, which was really nice. And as soon as that happened, I was like, oh, I'm doing it! I'm the best meditator there ever was! I'm enlightenment, I'm like Buddha right now. And of course it was gone just as soon as I experienced it, because the ego tried to take over and be in charge. But that little bit was enough for me to experience and think, like, well, there's something here. There's something there for me to go after. At least I've seen like the first step and I felt it. And I didn't have that when I was growing up in church. It was all very much like, this is just a thing that we're telling you to do, and you should believe us, just trust me. But faith is like, in the way that this bishop explains it, it's not the absence of reason. It's not the absence of like logic. It is like beyond that. And so we can experience that in our own practice, right? Where it's not like you're trying to just suspend your disbelief and hope that something good happens. You are basically going to that place beyond logic. In meditation, in Zen, we call this what is beyond the darkness of closed eyes. You're not just there kind of thinking. It's like, what's beyond that? What is there to experience that is beyond your normal day-to-day, like, this is the way that I interact with the world and with people and with myself and my own thoughts. There's something beyond that. And he describes it like, you are not going after and seeking something, because oftentimes you'll go seek, and the harder you look for it, the more it escapes you. This is like one of my students who described learning Tai Chi is like trying to pet a cat. And if you try to go after the cat, it runs away. I'm taking care of my brother's cat right now for 2 days, and whenever I go to try to pet him, he runs away. But if I just sit there, then he'll eventually wander over and get in my lap, and then I'll just pet him for a second, and then he'll just leave. And this is kind of what faith and part of what our practice is like. It's not being attached to something. The more you have this idea of the thing that you're looking for, and you have that attachment, you're stuck. You can't actually experience what is the greatest thing to experience. You have to just let it kind of find you and fill you up. So when we meditate, you're not necessarily seeking anything. You're just there being. You are like empty, and you let the moment fill you up. And whatever that is perfect. Right? I used to think when I'm meditating, I have to have a certain kind of experience. I have to have a great meditation by not thinking at all and by being totally focused and calm, or like, some kind of beautiful imagery is going to pop into my head, and there's going to be like the light parting through the clouds and shining upon me. But it doesn't have to be any of that. It's just, you're just there, open for whatever is possible. That's faith. And that's what we have to have as we're practicing and meditating. There's a little tiny thing that he mentioned almost in passing that I liked when God tells Moses, I think when he comes upon the burning bush, he says to take off your shoes. He says, Moses, take off your shoes, you're on holy ground. And I like that because we always practice without our shoes on. And I like to think of the dojo and these mats. For me, this is holy ground. This is where I like to just be the best version of myself. I try to let go of everything petty and all of the stuff outside there. My shoes can carry all that. They stay in the shoe rack. But out here, it's like this, the nakedness of the feet allows me to really be connected to this space where we practice, and doesn't drag any of that other dirty nonsense into here, right? So whether you think of the mats as holy ground or not, there is that kind of feeling of, this is different. I'm removing my shoes and being here totally connected in the present. There's this idea of reincarnation. In Buddhism, depending on the type of Buddhism, the idea of reincarnation is there, and it's there in other faiths as well. This is again something that I'll just touch on briefly, but the idea is Christians believe that God reincarnated essentially as Jesus, or incarnated as Jesus. It wasn't like God died and then came back as Jesus. But there is this same kind of idea where you can kind of, in reincarnation in the other sense, in like Buddhist, Hindu philosophy, there's this idea of we die, but there's that part of us that remains, and then it gets to be reborn and reborn multiple times until eventually you become enlightened. And there is that kind of connection to godliness or the divine and reincarnation. The idea was that Jesus was meant to be like God's incarnation on earth, to show us that like even a human being can be divine and can be something bigger than what we see ourselves as usually. He talks about God as being like the author of a book rather than a character in the book. And he's always present. Like the author of the book is always present, but you can't point to the author. He's everywhere and nowhere. And this is nice because we want to be able to think of ourselves as like the author of our own story, the author of our own lives. And there's another piece that I'll get to here later on that hits this a little bit more on the head. But if we see ourselves as a character in the story, even if we are the main character, and this is like a thing going around on social media, right? It's like a meme where like this person is the main character. They like act like they're the main character. We're all kind of fooling ourselves, right? We are really what we want to be is the author, which is like we can look from a higher perspective down on what's happening in life, and then we don't get caught up in it. We don't get attached to this character being a certain way. When we're able to kind of view ourselves from that distance, when we get a little bit of that separation, then this gives us the freedom to act and be however we want to, right? We're not stuck with the way that we have always experienced ourselves as being. So in meditation, you might have this experience where you're sitting there and you're thinking, and it's like having a rough time in meditation. But if you're able to like separate yourself out, I like to think of it like I'm playing a video game. My favorite video games are the ones where I've got my little guy or girl like running around on the screen and I can see them. I don't like the first person ones as much because I'm like, what am I, just a pair of hands? But you can see like you're the little guy running around. It's like they're jumping and they're trying to shoot people or whatever. And if you can get that sense in your meditation and then in life where you can kind of separate back and be like, ooh, I'm watching myself do all this stuff. And some of the stuff I'm doing is great. Some of the stuff I'm doing is really stupid. But it's not me. This is like the character that I'm playing, and I'm like the author that's writing all of this. And sometimes you write this character into some really stupid stuff. And sometimes you're like, all right, well now this person is going to do something really great. If you allow yourself to have that perspective of the author, it's not just separate, it's like above and kind of containing your ego and your small self. That's that little character running around on the screen is your small self, the ego. So you have that as a part of you, but it's not you. The interviewer asked about the 7 deadly sins. And the idea of a sin is like, this is a thing you're not supposed to do. It's clearly kind of prescribed. Well, some of it is very clear and some of it is very not clear and confusing. That's part of the problem. But there are the 7 worst things that you really shouldn't do. And these are different from the 10 commandments, but related. But he asked, like, what is the worst of the 7 deadly sins? And this bishop said that pride is the worst. And everybody thinks that it's like lust or gluttony or whatever else, but it's really pride, where all of the other ones flow from pride. And this was like, yes, of course, that's just like ego. It's like if you're stuck in the ego and you're always prideful, or the opposite of that is you have no confidence or no pride, and you think you're either amazing or you think you're terrible. Both of those things are wrong, and being stuck on that level of pride is not conducive to a happy, kind of healthy, powerful existence. So he brings up this, I unfortunately don't know nearly enough about Dante's Inferno. I haven't read it. I want to say it's a book that has like pictures in it, but there's a picture in Dante's Inferno of Satan, who is in the center of the earth. And it's not fire and brimstone, it's ice. And he paints this whole crazy picture, and he talks through it. But basically, this is like Satan is stuck in ice, stuck in his own pride, and this is Satan's problem. He was like overly prideful, and he thought like, I can do what God does, and that's why he got stuck. So we don't want to be stuck. We don't want to be always thinking through pride or allowing that to be in charge. We want to be able to transcend that. He says humility is the most important. So humility is like the opposite of pride. And that, again, humility is not the same as thinking that I'm trash. Humility is recognizing that I'm not the best, I'm also not the worst, I'm not really stuck on either of those things. It is just like really being in the present moment. So he says, like a dog who's playing, and he paints this picture of a dog just playing fetch on the beach. He's like, this dog that is just playing is the perfect example of humility. The dog isn't trying to be in charge of everything. The dog is not thinking that they're the best or the worst. The dog is just there and just having a good time, just there in the present. And so we can learn from that. We don't want to have all of the qualities of a dog, but at least this one, the ability to be present, and that kind of that love that transcends everything. You know, you come home, and I know Meryl's got dogs. I don't have dogs, but if you have a dog, I'm sure some days you come home and it's like it's been a real crappy day, and the only great thing about your day is that dog just comes up to you and it's got this love that is so complete, and it doesn't care. This dog doesn't care what you did that day. It doesn't care anything about, just like, feed me and I'm happy, and that's it. So we should learn from that and be a little bit more like a dog. We don't want to be obsessed with counting our sins. This was what I was like. My experience of being a young Catholic boy in church and in school was always like, am I going to go to hell, or am I going to go to heaven? Or like, did I do enough good things to counteract the bad things? Did I hit a certain point where, I got to be really careful of all of this? And this kind of obsessive accounting doesn't really lead us to where we want to be. So he says, just love. And he describes love as being interested in the good for the other. So this is like being a great partner in class. I was describing this earlier in class today, where to be a truly great partner is to put yourself in your partner's shoes and give them what they need the most. It's very hard to do because, you know, your partner's throwing a punch at you and you're thinking about, like, how can I avoid messing up? How can I avoid getting hit? How can I avoid looking dumb? But if we're able to put ourselves over there with our partner, then first of all, we're going to give them a much better experience, but we will have a much better experience. We're not stuck in the ego. We're not stuck in the separation. We're just like fully experiencing what our partner is going through. And this is a really important thing to be able to do in martial arts as a great partner, but in any great relationship. You must put yourself in their shoes to fully empathize and understand what they're going through, not just be stuck over here in your own head. So, being interested in what your partner's going through gets us outside of ourselves, and it gives us a more full, connected experience. One of the things he says is just like think of God as being love. Love is, you know, this force that kind of gets us outside of ourselves. So we can think of that, like that experience of God, the divine, of, you know, Buddha nature, of our true highest self. It is all about that, getting out of our small self, connecting to something bigger. Love is one of the easiest, not always easy. Love is one of the surest ways of being able to experience that. And he talks about what they call the Holy Trinity in Catholicism, which is the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. You've probably heard this before. You see people make the sign of the cross, and that's what they say when you bless yourself or when somebody's blessing you. But he puts it into this context, which I really loved. He says, this is like the Father and the Son are like the lover and the loved. It's like the person doing the loving, the person getting loved. And then the Holy Spirit is like that love between them. It's like love itself. And this is like when I talk about when you're practicing with a partner, I have my energy, I have my partner's energy, but then we have the energy that we create together. And this is really what is there for us when we're practicing, is to be able to get outside of ourselves by creating that energy together. When we connect to that, then we're not stuck in our small self. And this is the last thing that I've got. They went on for like 2 hours after this, but this idea of not seeking worldly things. So I talk about this sometimes, and I'm sure the first time that I heard this was way back when in church or in Catholic school, this idea of not seeking possessions. The way to happiness is not having more and more stuff, more expensive cars and bigger houses or any of that stuff, because that is a losing game. There's always somebody with a nicer house or a nicer car, and you will always be chasing that, right? You say to yourself, I want a Ferrari. I've always wanted a Ferrari. As soon as I get a Ferrari, I'll be happy. And then you get your Ferrari, and then you see somebody driving next to you with their Lamborghini, and you're like, that's what I've got to have. Or just the next year model of Ferrari comes out. There's always something more to get. This is what they call the hedonic treadmill, or this kind of cycle of desire. There is always something more that I've got to have. So what we want to be able to do is separate ourselves from this. And I had never heard this idea in Catholicism, but this bishop talks about an image that you'll see sometimes in a Catholic church, and it's like an old Gothic church. And I don't know, I imagine this being like in a big, beautiful stained glass window, or maybe it's like a fresco and it's painted on the wall or something. But it's what they call the Wheel of Fortune. It's not the game show, but it is the wheel of like your earthly fortune. And he says on the top is a king. On the bottom of the wheel is like a poor person or destitute. And then every step in between is like the poor person getting more and more until they become the king, and the king's at the top, so what all they can do is lose it, so then they're getting poorer and poorer until they are the person on bottom. And anywhere along that stage, I don't think any of us are kings and none of us are totally destitute. We're somewhere in between there. We're on some point on the outside of the wheel. He says every point there is anxiety, because you're always grasping for more or being worried about what you've lost, and that is no way to live. He says you want to be in the middle. So in the middle of this picture is where they put the picture of Jesus. And he's like, that's where you want to be, is right where Christ is, in the middle of this, not worried about the wheel. So this is back to that idea that I was talking about, where you can separate yourself from your experience. You will be somewhere on that circle in your kind of material life, right? But that doesn't mean that that is your whole experience of life. If you are completely stuck on that place where you are on the outside of the wheel, then you're always anxious about what's happening. But if you can be in the middle and just watch the wheel, you watch the wheel turn, you're not experiencing the up and down. And you hear me talk about this all the time, the ups and downs of life. And this is the way that life goes. You will never just be like this for the whole rest of your life, and you'll never be like this for the whole rest of your life. It's gonna go, right? This is the up and down of the circle. If you can separate yourself from that or be in the center, then you can just watch it and be entertained by it, right? It's like you're kind of on a roller coaster, and if you are at the top and you have to stay at the top, you're not going to be very happy because you know you're going down. If you're going down and you think you're stuck there, you're wrong, because you're also going back up. So this is like the way to the way to get some separation and some perspective in life is to just be in the center or be on the outside and be able to look at that way that life cycles and goes up and down. And meditation is part of what gives us that perspective. When we are able to separate ourselves from our emotions and our thoughts and just experience them without being attached to them, then we can watch them, we can see them right away when they arise, and we can decide to watch that, we can decide to let it go, but we recognize that it's not us. So, in the same way that the idea in Catholicism or Christianity is you are like a soul that eventually transcends and ends up in heaven, this is the idea that we want to get to just here in this life, is being able to transcend. Don't get stuck being your small self. Be able to transcend and become connected to your larger self, your highest self. So, in meditation, and I know I talked for a long time, we're going to do it for about 10 minutes. Sit comfortably. I'll go over some ideas of posture. You can hit all the lights except for the top. So, you guys here are sitting in seiza or cross-legged, however you want to sit so that it's comfortable. What you don't want is for your knees to be sticking way up, because then your legs are going to fall asleep even during a short-ish meditation like this. So, your knees are even with or below, kneeling or cross-legged is fine. Your spine is straight, so you don't want to be slouching. You want to roll your shoulders back and relax. Your hands, if you are cross-legged, you might be able to have your hands on your knees. Having them on your hips is another great option because it helps you kind of support your shoulders, keeping them back in a good posture. Your hands are separate or together, but again, try not to slide down and slouch. Your chin is parallel to the ground. We're not looking up, we're not looking down, we're just in a neutral position. And then I like to think of the crown of my head raising straight up towards the ceiling, and that really straightens me out. Then, the eyes are closed, upturned to the point between your eyebrows. This is just helping us to slightly raise up our gaze so that we're not starting to fall asleep. We associate with a raised consciousness when the eyes are starting to raise up slightly. And make sure that you're not crossing your eyes. So if you're starting to get a headache during meditation, it's because you're probably crossing your eyes. So just look out in the distance at something that's third eye height, just above your own eyes.